Hello, I am Jeffrey Martin, Director of the University of Georgia Performing Arts Center. Thank you so much for joining us today for the latest installment in Arts Chats, part of our virtual programming this season. The recording of this conversation will be archived on our Facebook and YouTube channel, and you can return to watch it again or share it with your friends. I hope you'll join us as we continue to offer performances and events in our virtual concert series in the weeks ahead. Please visit us online at pac.uga.edu to learn more about these events. Now, on with today's conversation. I'm so pleased to welcome Jennifer Koh to the studio today. Violinist Jennifer Koh is recognized for her intense, commanding performances, delivered with dazzling virtuosity and technical assurance. A forward-thinking artist, she is dedicated to exploring a broad and eclectic repertoire while promoting equity and inclusivity in classical music. She has expanded the contemporary violin repertoire through a variety of commissioning projects and has premiered more than 100 works written especially for her. Jennifer's series include Alone Together, which is an online commissioning project and performance series in support of composers during the coronavirus crisis. The New York American Concerto, which invites a diverse collective of composers to examine socio-cultural topics relevant to American life today through the form of the violin concerto. Limitless, which explores the relationship between composer and performer through duo works played by her and the composers. Bach and Beyond, which traces the history of the solo violin repertoire from Bach's sonatas and partitas to pieces by 20th and 21st century composers. And Shared Madness, comprising short solo works that explore virtuosity in the 21st century, commissioned from over 30 composers. Jennifer has appeared with orchestras worldwide, including the New York and Los Angeles Philharmonics, the Cleveland, Mariinsky, Minnesota, and Philadelphia orchestras, and the Atlanta, Baltimore, BBC, and Chicago symphonies, among others. Named Musical America's 2016 Instrumentalist of the Year, she has won the International Tchaikovsky Competition in Moscow, Concert Artists Guild Competition, and an Avery Fisher Career Grant. She has a degree in English literature from Oberlin College and studied at the Curtis Institute. She is an active lecturer, teacher, and recording artist, and is the artistic director and founder of the nonprofit Arco Collaborative. Quite a resume, and I'm so thrilled to be able to speak with her. Welcome, Jennifer Koh, today.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome. It's so great to have some time to speak with you. How are you holding up these days?
For the pandemic, I kind of take it one day at a time. I think that's the only way we can do it. And then I always also try to remember that there will be an end point to this.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. And I'm seeing glimmers of hope of that. Are you feeling somewhat hopeful, at least a little more hopeful today than perhaps a while ago?
Yeah, I mean, I did my first live performance yesterday at the Guggenheim in New York. And that before that, prior to that, the last live performance I had done was in October at Lincoln Center. I've done a bunch of different kind of video streams of concerti and recitals and stuff like that. But I feel like there might be hope because the Guggenheim was inside. Lincoln Center was outside. So maybe there's hope.
Yeah. What was that like for you to be performing for an audience again?
You know, when I played in October, because I don't think I've ever gone that long without performing since maybe before I was 3, because I had been in Suzuki, and part of that is that it's not a big deal to be on stage. So everybody's all the kids are on stage all the time. And so at that concert, I actually was weeping. But this felt more like maybe we're returning to normal life, or maybe there's a new normal. Yeah, we'll see.
It will take some time, won't it? We're just kind of at the beginning of emerging out of the cocoon.
Yes, we'll hope. We'll hope.
Yeah. How has we've just read through your bio, which is hugely, I'm just very accomplished, and of course, I get the impression you like to maintain a very active, creative, and professional career. So, how has the pandemic impacted you?
I mean, for me, you had mentioned Alone Together, which is something that I kind of put together within the first couple weeks of the shelter in place order last March of 2020. And that was really because I think when you're in the arts, like for example, when I'm playing a piece, I always know what the end is going to be, even before I start the first note, right? So you have to always be thinking forward. And so even then, I was thinking, okay, at the end of this pandemic, what kind of person will I look back at? Am I going to, have only been scared? Am I only going to have been worried about myself? And I decided that it was important to help other people. And I think that's become even more important to me now. I guess it was always important, but I think I can find more literal ways of helping people, especially because, I feel that I do have some amount of agency through ARCO Collaborative in terms of being able to commission people and create work that really brings forward issues that we're really grappling with today. So, for example, last week, or 2 days ago, I was recording a piece with my co-creator, Devon Tynes, for Carnegie Hall, which is, it involves the song Strange Fruit, which is, of course, a song about lynching of Black Americans. And yet the video is interspliced with violence against Asian Americans. So we try to find ways of showing empathy, alliance, humanity, acknowledging the humanity in everyone, and also the fact that when we really care, we can activate spaces where we can hear everybody's voice.
That's really powerful. Is the ARCO Collaborative, that's the intention, is to help kind of coalesce music and action? Or what would you say is the meaning behind that project?
I mean, it's always been about bringing forward underrepresented stories, and that kind of creatively for me, obviously I play work of, European men that have been that died like, 300 years ago. I do a lot of Bach, and it's amazing music. But I also realize that there have been portions of humanity that have not been heard in classical music. And I think in this more globalized society, that in order to have relevance and to also have the ability to kind of communicate within modern society, it's really important to bring forward underrepresented voices that really actually are members of our society, and we haven't heard from them before. Because it's always been more interesting to me to hear what other people have to say, because I already know what's happening in my own head. So actually, oftentimes it's because I'm curious about what they have to say.
Yeah. And how did you go about those initial collaborations? Did you have people in mind that you were wanting to work with already, or did you put out a call for, ideas?
Oh, no. Please, nobody send me things.
I'm not suggesting that.
No, I usually just do a lot of research online. Before it was the pandemic, I oftentimes, if I had nights off, if I had days that I was not performing, sometimes I was even flying to different cities to hear premieres of their works or things like that. So it was really an extensive amount of research and kind of effort. For Alone Together, there wasn't that time to help the freelance community. I felt that time was of the essence. So that's the only time that I have gone purely by recommendation. But it was, a lot of them were so wonderful that I feel really grateful that I was introduced to them. So.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Alone Together and kind of boil that down to its essence. What is that, and how did you kind of get that going?
So Alone Together was really a project in which I think the music community came together to help younger members of our community. I think my greatest fear is that we'll lose the younger generation, because it's hard enough to be in your 20s. It's hard enough to be a musician, period, right? And then, but also on top of that, to be in your 20s. Normally it was really difficult. And then add upon that the coronavirus, the pandemic. And I knew it was critical. I mean, not that this project was going to solve everybody's problems, but at least it could help a little bit. So basically I went to all of my friends and colleagues that had salaried positions or institutional support that I knew had those things, and they really wanted to help their younger colleagues as well. So they were willing to donate their work so we could get some traction. And they recommended younger freelance composers. And so through ARCO Collaborative, we were able to micro-commission 20 younger freelance composers for $500 for 30 seconds. So it's kind of the standard commissioning rate is $1,000 per minute. So I wanted to make these things fair. And then since then, I've been doing streams of their works, like in recitals, because that way they can still get synchronization rights fees. And I just finished doing an audio recording, which will be released, will have its digital release, I think, at the end of the summer or so.
Oh, wonderful.
So, and through that, they'll be able to get mechanical licensing fees and things like that. So I wanted to create some way of, so that they could continuously have a source of income throughout the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So is there a place someone can go now to listen to the works, or do we wait for the album?
Well, the premieres that I did in my living room are still posted. It's interesting because I mean, it was because New York City, I live in New York, and I live next to a major hospital in New York City. And it was horrifying. That time in March last year was just, it was terrifying, it was tragic, it was horrifying. And it's something that I don't want to remember because it was so awful. But, the pieces that were written in that time, many of them, the composers did live in New York. And so you can hear, it's like a musical archive of that time. And in a weird way, it doesn't let me forget, which I think is actually important not to forget. I think it's actually important to remember. So in those pieces, they're all for solo violin because I had to do it in my living room. You hear a lot of ambulance sirens actually running throughout. And you also, what I realized is that I also, now looking back, it was different ways that people were coping. So there's one piece called Cooper and Emma by this wonderful composer, Angelica Negron. And how she processed it was by looking at these dog videos of Cooper and Emma. And they're like bouncing balloons off of like their noses. And so that's what the piece is about, because that's how, you know, basically like put the covers over your head and just like obsessively watch, you know, dog videos. For others, it's really, you know, songs about mourning. There were pieces written in memoriam for other people. Other pieces were about this kind of brain fog that descended on a lot of us, I think, at that time. So in a weird way, it is a musical archive of that time. And I'm grateful. I never thought about it at that time, but now I'm grateful looking back.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. And I've been thinking about artists in general during the pandemic and how, you know, I imagine that a lot of artists are busy at work creating these magnificent things that are going to come forth, you know, in the next year or two. But this is actually an immediate response. These short works, they are now available, and they're kind of reactionary and immediate in a way that these other artworks that we may yet see might not be. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important for classical music, or at least for the work that I do. I feel that it's always a balance with music from the past, but there needs to be some kind of cord or thread that connects it to the present, right? And so I've always felt that it was important to be reactive to the present and to engage the present. And now, having gone through this pandemic with Alone Together, I realized it's important to archive the time that we live in. And we can do that musically and artistically. Yeah, but in other ways, it just totally sucks. This pandemic totally sucks.
Yes. Well, way to make the best of a bad situation, at least, I think.
Yeah.
You seem to be very entrepreneurial when it comes to music, and this idea of, you know, of connecting the past and the present and the future of classical music. That's really interesting, I think, and unique in a lot of ways. But what is it? What is it? Why would you say that that's part of your personal mission? Has that?
I've always seen going into the arts the way that I could validate my entering the arts, right? Because my parents were refugees in the Korean War, and I remembered when I wanted to go into music, they were like, music? People don't need musicians during war. They need doctors. You should be a doctor, right? So, but I was thinking about the importance of service, right? So part of it is serving my community of artists, which I feel that something like Alone Together is that. But then it's also about serving your larger communities that we live in. And so the New American Concerto Project is really about asking people to bring forward voices and people that might have not been known. So, for example, the first concerto written for the New American Concerto Project was by Vijay Iyer, and it was called Trouble. And the title of the whole piece comes from Representative John Lewis, civil rights activist. He called it Good Trouble, right? And then the middle movement is dedicated to Vincent Chin, who was a Chinese American who was beaten to death in Detroit in the 80s because they thought, or they said he was Japanese, which he was Japanese, and stealing their jobs, right? So this happened after Detroit. And so this was written in 2016. It was premiered in 2017. And it's shocking to me that it's so relevant now. It's sad to me that it's this relevant now, but I realize that we have a duty, or I feel that I have the duty to bring these things forward, and bring these voices forward and create space for people to, simply exist. The latest concerto that I premiered was by Courtney Bryan, and each of the movements in her concerto was a celebration of a different visual artist, female visual artists of color, right? So it's not always, it's about bringing forward these people that maybe, I've certainly learned a lot from working with different composers and the issues that they care about, and we engaged with the issues that I care about as well. So yeah, it's about service, I think. And then in the end, I think it's really about serving your art form, because I think if we kind of keep it within this frame of just putting people like Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart on these pedestals, it's really kind of dehumanizing them, because they were really human beings. They made their mistakes. They were complicated people, and we put them on these pedestals to kind of just worship them and not, really see the flesh and blood of who they were as artists that also suffered, that also struggled. And so I think it's important to serve the art form going forward, and to bring these human voices in, and to include their stories into classical music. And I feel like that's the way it will survive in the future. I feel, at least my personal belief is, that's the only way classical music will be able to survive going forward.
We can't only rely on the catalog of music from 200, 300 years ago. We have to, we have to build the catalog of works now for tomorrow, right? And
yeah, and during their time, there was no such thing as playing older music. It was all new then, right? So it's kind of, it's fascinating to me that how much that's changed. And so, for example, like Limitless, I was like, well, we should make it a living presence, like on stage, which is why I wanted to do these duos with the performers, with the composers also performing. And yeah, it's all a living, evolving art form, just like we're all living and evolving.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So let's talk a little bit about your Bach and Beyond project. What is that project, and how did that come about? Because you're known, people know you for your wonderful interpretations of the Bach repertoire, and you obviously have a talent and affinity for his music. So how did that come about?
It's interesting. It just felt like the right thing at the time, but it was also, at the time, it was the most terrifying thing. And I was terrified of performing Bach in public, absolutely terrified. And so as soon as I'm terrified of something, I'm like, oh, I should totally do it, because, I have to do it now that I realize I'm absolutely terrified of it. And so at that time, it was the way that I found courage to do it was, but I remember thinking, well, if this is terrifying for me, it must be super terrifying for composers to write for solo violin, because there's this huge presence of repertoire by Bach, and how, I would hear from composers, they're like, well, what am I going to write after that? And yet it's stuff that was written 300 years ago. So Bach and Beyond consists of newer music, also historical music like Bartok and Isai. So it's not just stuff that was written today. And it's kind of about how they engage with that presence of Bach. Because honestly, I don't think there's a single composer that has written for violin a solo violin that is not engaging with Bach. So that's been my experience, and it really helped me. It helped me get through that fear, and then I started doing these marathon recitals of all 6 sonatas and partitas. And I was supposed to do that during this last year, which was pandemic year. But hopefully if life returns to normal, I'll be starting them up again in the fall. So we'll see what happens.
We can look forward to that.
Yes, hopefully.
We actually have a small clip of of a performance of the Bach Chaconne, and why don't we just take a look? This is just the last couple minutes.
Do I have to listen to myself? Oh.
You can plug your ears if you want.
Okay.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful performance. Is it hard to watch or listen to yourself without being too critical?
I have to remind myself that every performance and even every recording that I do is simply a snapshot of that day. Otherwise, I don't think I could. Yeah, but it's painful to listen to myself. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of artists could relate to that, for sure. So what do you hope for the future of the Bach and Beyond project? Is that something that will continue to expand?
I think so. I think I've been thinking about also pairing it with some of the Alone Together pieces. I have this, or at least my relationship to the 6 sonatas and partitas, is that it was kind of a personal, private musical journal of Bach's life. And because it was never commissioned, we don't even know that whether it was performed at all publicly or ever, actually. And it was written, I think, over a 17-year period of his life. And so you really see his development and evolution as an artist throughout all 6. And I think for that reason, and it's a solitary journey in a way. So that's the other thing. So he writes "se solo," which basically means you are alone, right? And so I think "Alone Together" works. I feel like it would be appropriate.
Yeah.
To include this.
Yeah, it feels like it could be a natural fit.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the classical music industry in general. And you've been working, of course, for a long time and studied at Curtis and elsewhere. Do you have any advice you would give to young people today who are embarking on the path to become a professional classical musician?
Oh my God. First of all, I'm going to say I'm so sorry it's the pandemic, because I know it makes everything so much harder. And what I always found the most important thing is to remember that all of your colleagues are going to be your friends going forward, and that all of us need each other, and all of us need to take care of each other. And all of us are members of this community. And that is the most important thing that I have learned in my entire career, is the importance of that community and to build that community. So for me, that would be my advice. I'm sure people were like, okay, so what do I do like to get a job? But everything, that all shifts, right? Like coming out of the pandemic, I think it's going to be different than what it is now, and from what it was before the pandemic. So I can't really give specific advice like do X, Y, Z, because it's going to be changing. But one thing that I can say is that community is everything. So really build that, support each other, and you will get through this. And honestly, at the end, you're going to be happier when you are part of this community.
Yeah, you really do need that support group as you're having lots of down days and some up days, don't you?
Yeah.
As I look at your, the work you've done, I also would maybe add that you need to create your own opportunities whenever possible. I can see that you've identified opportunities to express your creativity by creating new work and, packaging, for a lack of a better word, putting together different works in such a way that is interesting and can not only highlight the older work that exists, but shine a light on newer work. So I think, would you say that finding ways to create your own opportunities is a key part of what you've done?
Yeah, I like the word create, because I think when we're in the arts, it's about kind of building the vision of what the world you want to live in and what your part is going to be in that world. And then thinking back step by step, how you'll make and create that world. And yeah, for me, I mean, to be honest, I don't know that I thought so much about literal career stuff. I feel like I was really lucky because I had people that thought about it for me to a certain degree. I think I worried a lot when I first started out. I didn't know whether, because it had not been in my family to be musicians, so I didn't really know how anything worked. So I kind of learned it step by step. I think you're right, though. I think everything is about preparing for that moment when you will have that opportunity. So, because you don't want it to be that suddenly an opportunity appears and you're like, what? So I think definitely doing the work, and everybody will have that chance. But I guess it's be ready for that chance.
Mm-hmm. What are, as you think about the industry of classical music, you've had, of course, you focus a lot of your efforts on equity and diversity and inclusion and shining a light on voices who have not been heard. What can we do? What needs to be done? What are some steps do you feel like should be taken to help open up classical music even more?
I think that for me, it's really about engaging with our communities, right? So I love listening to Beyonce and seeing her work just as much as I love seeing Andres Schiff. I love seeing the new videos that come out, whether it's like Jay-Z, Dr. Dre, right? Because I feel that even if we're talking about NWA, right, with Black Lives Matter from the summer, they were talking about that back in the 80s and the 90s, right? So again, it's where the arts were trying to communicate what was happening before the rest of society kind of caught up to it. So I think engaging with all of these different, to not think that they're genres, right? You have great artists, you have mediocre artists, and you have bad artists. It's not that, oh, this is like the visual artist over here. That's it all has to do with how we perceive the world and then how we create as a result of our perceptions. So I feel like the most important thing is to just try to engage with as many great artists as one can. And not everything's going to inspire us, and not everything's good either. But it's important to have that curiosity. Yeah.
I love that word curiosity, and I think that's so important. I find in my own work, I work on the administrative side of the arts, but I find that a curiosity in not only my work, but in the world and in other art forms really comes back to benefit and inform what I do on a regular basis.
And it makes life more interesting, right?
It really
in
does.
the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any hopes for the future of classical music? What would you like to see happen in the next few years?
What I hope to see happen is, because I think that the field is transforming so much, like, for example, it's on video, it's being streamed. What I do hope is that people will make space for artists to envision that future and then do programming coming out of it. Because I'm really curious about how other artists are thinking and how they would create a pathway that includes the experiences that we've had, so technology like streaming, but also integrating it with that when we return, that time when we can actually all be in the same space with each other. So that's one of the things I'm curious about. Also, coming out of the Spanish flu, it was the Roaring 20s and also the Weimar period, for example, where we had this kind of explosion, Gustav Klimt, cabaret, all of these different things, and all of these different kind of philosophies as well, and different kind of social awareness at that time. Hopefully we won't go the way of Hitler, which happened after that, but it was an explosion of creativity. So that's what I'm looking forward to the end of this.
Yeah, I love that idea. An explosion of creativity. That's a great outlook. I think we could all benefit from that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even Stravinsky, like Soldier's Tale, he actually wrote that piece, I think, as a direct result of the Spanish flu. So the idea was that it was like, now we call it potting, right? But the idea was that it would be a select group of actors, like 3 actors and a small group of musicians, and they would go to different towns and put together this production. It was totally unsuccessful in his time, but it was a great, interesting idea. I mean, it didn't work, but now we get that music.
Yeah, that's right. Trial and error can result in some really wonderful things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it could end up being a period of great experimentation too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, everything from architecture to design to philosophy. I mean, even Freud was happening at that time, much less Second Viennese School and music. So there's so much that just shifted and changed immediately. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing that, what it's like.
Yeah, me too. Well, that's a great way to conclude, I think, to wrap up our conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing about your projects and your work and your career, and I think you have a really unique and wonderful perspective about the power of a single artist to move the artwork forward. And I'm excited to see what continues to happen with you and your projects. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
taking some time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you to everyone for joining us for this arts chat with Jennifer Koh. I've really enjoyed this time together, and hope you will share this with your friends. Those of you who've been watching throughout the season, I really appreciate your support. And we've got a few more events coming up on our virtual series this spring. And we look forward to being with you again in person as soon as possible. For more information about our events, visit pac.uga.edu. Thank you.